You guys have been extra busy on my subreddit lately, sending me stories about exorcisms, demonic deer, and other allegedly true horrors. So today I'm gonna read some of those spooky stories sent to me from my subreddit, r/DarknessPrevails. Prepare yourself. These stories might just keep you awake all night. If you have a scary experience, share it with us at darkstories.org or reddit.com/r/DarknessPrevails. I would love to hear some stories about nature spirits, forest monsters, and night shift horrors. Now, let's begin. The Deer Demon from seathartorias. This has been going on all the way back to 1990, when I was 7 years old. I call this the Deer Demon because I don't think it's a Wendigo or Skinwalker. The story starts in 1990, Fort Mojave Desert, living by the Colorado River in a house we were renting. It was about 9 p.m. My dad and I were sitting in front of the garage door, which was open. We were looking out to the river that was about 4 to 5 blocks away. All of a sudden, we see what appears to be a woman crossing the street, but she looks wrong. She looked skinny with long black hair, but what appeared wrong about her were her limbs, which were inverted. This street in question was close to the river. You could hear moans and what sounded like crying, but in stutters. My dad and I both stood up to see better. And then suddenly, the figure stopped, turned its head, and tilted it, as if it was looking at us. My heart sank. I felt paralyzed in fear. Then, in a split second, it fell forward hard and fast. We couldn't see it for a moment, until it rose up again on all fours with its elbows and knees sticking out. It began crawling towards us at full speed. We ran back, closing the garage door. Once it shut fully, we waited for a moment, but heard a sudden bang against the garage door, followed by heavy, stuttered breathing and scratching. Then there was a voice coming from outside.
Help me. Help me.
It sounded like someone saying, "Help me," without using their lips or tongue. The garage was connected to the house. My mom opened the door to see why we were banging around, though that wasn't us. She immediately saw the fear in our faces. My dad bolted past her to check the front door to make sure it was locked. Thankfully it was, but upon looking outside, there was nothing there. The living room had windows all around, and there were streetlights outside to see, so we were sure it was gone. The following day, we spoke to the landlord, who was Native American. He didn't want to hear the details, but already believed something had happened. He immediately looked toward the river as we told him our experience. Then he looked at my mother and I, then back to the river. He said that the spirit had already been seen, and it would be back. What it was, he couldn't be sure, but we should move away from the river. He was so serious, adamant about this, and afraid himself, that he allowed us to break our lease and recommended getting spirit smudged to make us not as bright, which is how he put it. Well, we didn't do that, but he did help us find a new place to rent further away. We lived in the next place from 1991 to 1994. To put it bluntly, the house was haunted, and it was the worst house I'd ever lived in. A lot of weird things happened there. Water turning on by itself, the sounds of footsteps in the hallways, doors opening all the time. You could even hear whispering in the closet. Then there were the shadows that watched us sleep, and the sound of tools being used in the garage, even though we didn't own anything special except a hammer and screwdrivers. To start off on the right foot, my dad took a new job here with the police department as a photographer. He took pictures of crime scenes, accidents, break-in points, all that. So cops were over all the time for dinner and check-ins. Whenever they were over, they would almost always see those shadows outside and doors slamming. It even gave the cops the chills. The house was basically doing what it wanted. The worst part of it was a shed outside that always sounded like something was inside, banging on the walls from within. The cops we had over would call us saying they were getting calls of banging in the backyard late at night. We locked the shed shut, thinking that someone was breaking in. We never opened it again. It was just that creepy. On the night it all went to heck, it was Christmas Eve. We were getting ready for midnight mass at the front door, grabbing our coats. The Jeep was always parked in the front of the house under a streetlight. My mom at one point looked outside, and she was frozen with fear. I looked at her, then looked outside as well toward the Jeep. There she was, that skinny, creepy, almost woman-looking thing hiding behind the car looking at us and waiting. I froze in fear, the same as I did before. I could clearly see it this time. There was more detail. Its body was as dark as a shadow. Perhaps it was fur or cloak of some kind. Its face still scares me to this day. It was a deer skull, and half of it was pure bone. The other was skin rotting and falling off of it. And if things weren't bad enough, at the same time we were seeing this creature again, the house was going crazy. All the doors were slamming shut at once, lights flickering on and off like a paranormal rave. Then, from within the house, we heard a booming, demonic voice say,
"Get out."
Then the deer demon stood up. As if it knew what the house was doing, it stared into the window at us, tilting its head the same way it had 2 years ago, stuttering a raspy breath. My mom grabbed us and ran us to the back where my sister's room was. Her room only had a door and no windows. She locked us in there. My dad called the cops, told them someone was trying to break in. Because who would believe a deer demon and ghosts were trying to get us? We told them we locked ourselves in my sister's room. Since my dad worked for the police, and they were family friends, they had a spare key at the station that they used to get in. This part of the story is from their perspective. 2 of them were inside our house and 2 were in the yard. Now our yard was sizable, about 1/4 of an acre. The perimeter of the house was fenced in. The officers outside were going around the house when they saw someone jump out of a tree and run into the creepy shed out there, breaking the lock on it easily. We heard the cops outside yelling freeze or stop. Then we could even hear the banging from the shed as it started up. It began with one subtle bang. The banging kept coming, gradually growing louder and louder. The officers inside quickly went out to the back to meet up with them. The shed was small. It was a tool shed after all. It was all wood and no windows. The officers announced that whoever was in the shed was now surrounded. But the banging continued, and it sounded like the wood was beginning to crack. The officers prepared to open the door. We heard one loud freeze before there were sounds of disgust. Apparently, after they opened the door, it was empty, except for a smell like sewage and corpse. They had the fire department come in, doing a septic check, even though we don't have anything out there by the shed. They also checked the floor and dirt around the area, as the smell was similar to a human body that had been buried. but they found nothing. Later on, after that terrible experience, we did find out that people have died in that house. That wasn't disclosed to us at the time, not that I recall anyway. We got out of that lease too and moved to Las Vegas. During this time, not a lot happened. It was still the 90s, we didn't have internet, and my mom spent a lot of her time researching the paranormal, how to keep things out of our house. She would write letters to churches, shaman, whomever would give her the time of day. Everywhere we moved, we began to collect a lot of crystals and stones. All of our windows and doorways would be lined with pink rock salt, and our mirrors were covered to prevent anything coming out. This may sound extreme, but it became our new normal. It seemed to work. Nothing strange happened for a long time, until my mother's health began to fail. She just couldn't keep up the maintenance of this anymore. We moved to Reno because it was cheaper at the time, and the cost of living was much more affordable. It was 2002 then, and I was now working too. Reno was fine until closer to my mother's passing. Things began to ramp up. Things were being moved, doors opening, knocking from inside the closet doors. And then my mother passed away, and all heck broke loose. It was as if she herself was the barrier that kept it all at bay from 1994 to 2004. After she passed, it was hard for my dad. He pretty much closed himself off. We moved to another apartment. He was always gone then. The two of us had opposing schedules and never really saw each other. My dad and I had always been close, but we weren't so much anymore. For a while there, it was like we were just roommates. At our new apartment, whatever spirits had been haunting us, they were now there, and it seemed to specifically target me. I would get sleep paralysis episodes at night. I could hear the closet door opening, footsteps coming to my bed, pacing back and forth alongside my bed. I couldn't open my eyes or move. I could only lie there in fear, listening to what was going on. On one especially terrifying occasion, I felt whatever it was stop at the foot of my bed, pull itself over the edge, and begin to crawl up my body. I could smell it. Its smell was horrid, and everything felt moist and humid. I could feel each imprint of foot and hand moving one at a time until it was over my face. I could feel disgusting hair or fur touching my face, its raspy breath against my skin. And then it spoke in a familiar voice.
I found you.
This must have kicked me into fight or flight mode, because I was able to summon my strength and pull myself up with force, kicking at the entity. I felt the weight lift off of me, and when I opened my eyes, there was nothing there. But my closet door, which I had shut, was now open, and my room smelled like rot. After that night, I changed my work schedule to the graveyard shift so I wouldn't have to be home at night, and I'd be able to sleep during the day. After that, not a lot happened, except one day I woke up to the hall closet being opened and the sound of banging in the kitchen. I thought it was my dad, but I remembered right away that he was out of town for a month. I was afraid. I could hear the clicking of the stove, but no flame. Then I heard the closet door slam shut. I ran out into the hallway to find nothing there, but the stove was on, emitting gas into the room. I turned it all off, then opened the hallway closet. There was nothing inside but towels. Nothing could really fit in there. It was tiny, shelves from top to bottom. I ended up changing the handles to locks, and I put door stoppers on all of them. I called the maintenance man to shut off my gas. I was never home and showered at work. and I didn't want to be blown up in my sleep or gassed. Luckily, they didn't question it. The last night I slept in that apartment, my dad was still gone. I was getting things ready to move across the country with my friends to live in Pennsylvania. I was working day shift again, so I stayed up all night the night before, so I'd be dead tired. Nothing had happened in a few weeks. I felt a bit more relaxed by then. Our apartment was on the second floor and my bed was by the window, which helped me get fresh air, and it was away from my locked closet. That night, I awoke to creaking and breathing by the window. My eyes flew open, and I already knew what to expect. But this time was different. I could move, and I was fully awake. I turned toward the sound at the window, and there I saw it, perched in the window frame, watching me sleep, tilting its head and reaching out for my face. I could hear it speak again, saying something like, "Come." I flew out of bed and fell onto the floor, trying to make a break for my lights, but when I clicked the light switch, nothing happened. I looked up, and it was still there looking at me, its arm outstretched, its tilted deer skull head staring at me. Its feet weren't feet, they weren't claws either. These appeared to be hooves. It stepped onto my bed as if it was going to approach me. I panicked, grabbing my computer chair, closing my eyes, and flinging it as hard as I could at the entity. What I heard next was the sound of smashed glass, and then nothing. I opened my eyes and saw that I had hit the window. There was glass all over my bed. I looked outside then, and everything was pitch black. I was in panic mode. Then suddenly there was a flashlight in my face from outside. Security was there. He was yelling that the power was out due to an earthquake. He didn't ask about the glass. Maybe he assumed that the earthquake had done it. I immediately told him someone tried to break in. The police were called. I told them what happened and I filed a report. Eventually my window would be fixed. Up until we moved away from that place, nothing else happened. My friend and I moved to Pennsylvania for a couple of years. It was fun and fine, but the woods there scared the heck out of me. Luckily, nothing ever happened in that house, except for my friend swearing up and down that he saw something watching us from the woods. I took that opportunity to tell him about my encounters throughout my life. He believed me, asking why I didn't tell him sooner. And of course, I explained that I thought no one would believe the story. He laughed and said that he couldn't blame me. The feeling the two of us got from the woods, at least for me, it was the same feeling I got from that deer demon and from the haunted house a long time ago. We made a deal to never go outside after dark, even for food. We would just wait for daytime. I said before that nothing really happened there, but now that I think about it, there was one event. The two of us were up late playing World of Warcraft, trying to get to level 60, and getting ready for Molten Core, when the power suddenly went out. Our computers were both in the living room, so we didn't have to use headsets. Suddenly we heard banging on the windows, followed by a cry coming from outside that said, "Let me in. Let me in." My friend began to get up. I think he was going to check it out, so I grabbed his arm and shook my head no. He looked confused. Then it hit him, the story I had told him. It could be the thing I'd been talking about. The crying then went from sobs to growls. They were coming from multiple windows quickly. I didn't say anything. I grabbed him, and we went into the hall bathroom, where there were no windows. My friend was trying to speak to me, but I shook my head no. I figured it was best we stayed quiet. The banging grew louder, and then we could hear whispers from the outside, but they sounded more distant. We couldn't make out what was being said, but to me it sounded like, "not now" or "not yet." The banging stopped too. Then we could hear crunching sounds heading further away until it all went silent. We stayed in that bathroom until sunrise. Then we went to check everything out. A storm had taken out the power pole a mile away, causing a blackout. My friend was horrified but happy at the same time. I told him it wasn't a game and that we need to be careful if it happens again. Up until 2012, I moved around for work. I ended up coming back to Reno with my wife and daughter to be closer with her family, and up until that point, nothing weird happened. But then it all came back. In the 6 years before that, I had done a lot of research. The internet had boomed, and it was easier to get help and contact someone. I got my spirit cleansed back in Arizona in my travels. I learned more about myself and how to protect my family. I was talking to a shaman, and I was not allowed to give details or say what it looked like, but I focused on positivity, and I was cleansed. He told me my spirit was very bright, like a beacon for attention, and that it was me that attracted darkness, not necessarily the places I was in. He said places are haunted, but those connected to death can see things more clearly. I asked if I was close to death because my mother died so soon. He shook his head. He explained that I have experienced death, but when I came back, something came back with me. Then it hit me. My parents once told me that I was born 3 months early, and my heart had stopped at one point. They brought me back. My lungs weren't good yet. I had a hard time breathing for a long time. That had to be it. I nodded, understanding what the shaman was telling me. But I feel this means that I'm haunted for life, and that I have to protect myself and to teach my family the same. I'm horrified that after I pass, this may go on to my children or wife, this susceptibility to darkness and evil. So, like my mother before me, I began to protect our house using crystals and stones, homemade herb candles, and rock salt. We don't cover the mirrors, but our house is clean. Nothing bad has happened, but outside, it's a whole different game. When we moved back, we had the window open for air. One day while we were sleeping, I heard crunching. I looked outside the window. I wasn't as worried then. We had a bunch of rose bushes with thorns on them, so it'd be difficult for someone to break in through the window. I rubbed my eyes, and there I saw it, that deer demon watching me sleep. But this time it looked different. Its head was still a deer skull, but it was pure clean white. I could see the eye holes and nothing was there. Just dark holes leading to nothingness. I stared at it, and it looked right back at me. It broke the lock and looked at the corners of the window, where I had big chunks of amethyst. It locked eyes with me again, quickly bolting through the rose bushes, then running away. I wish I could say it was the last time I saw it, but it wasn't. My wife saw it too. Our backyard and all the corners of the property, we have our birthstones in a pile with blessed rock salt. I wasn't entirely sure how effective that was, but it seemed to work. One night, my wife went to let the dogs out, but they were too afraid to go outside that night. Then she noticed that outside she couldn't hear a thing. Now our neighbors' dogs would bark 24/7, but even they were quiet. She quickly began scanning the yard. Outside our property, standing in the shadow of our neighbor's apple tree, she saw something. She said it was a white deer skull head. She told me it just fell to the ground without a sound and was gone. Then all the sounds came back, Cars, dogs, frogs, everything. She said it was the most terrifying thing she'd ever experienced. It's 2020 now. We live outside the city. There's new development behind us. Next to us is a rocky hill that towers over our property. Late night when I take my dogs out, I can still feel something watching me in the hills. I know it's there. I hear things that aren't native to the area, echoing in the dark desert, sometimes even screams. At this point, I feel it knows we're at a standoff, and it's letting me know it's waiting. But for what, I'm not sure. I don't live in fear anymore, but every now and then something does happen, and I always have a new, creepy story to share. I witnessed an exorcism. I will never forget it. From Justice Phaser. I've never opened up about this, let alone talked about it, but I think people should know that this kind of thing should be taken seriously. I was 10 years old at the time, and my babysitter always took me and my little brother to church. Now, she did this against my mother's wishes. My mom is a white witch. She's against the church's ways and was and still is very vocal about it. So when she found out about what my babysitter was doing, she was levied. She told my babysitter to burn, well, down there, and I thought that was that. I wish I could say that was the end of it, but even I am not that gullible. My mom dropped me off at a friend's house, and my brother stayed with one of his friends in town. Her friend Cassie was Catholic and didn't mind me being in her home. Unknown to my mom, I took one of her books. At the time, I thought it was a cookbook. It mentioned salt, garlic, and other things you see in your average kitchen. I was wrong, very wrong. Me and Cassie's son decided to try out one of the recipes. When we finished, Cassie's son John took what we made and drank it. The concoction was like terrible smelling milk. I later learned that what we had made was a potion that does God knows what. After John drank the potion, things got bad. He began convulsing and speaking in a language I didn't understand. He even began to foam at the mouth. I hate to admit it, but I screamed my head off. Out of nowhere, Cassie came running in demanding what I was screaming about, but then she saw her son screaming alongside me. She grabbed her Bible and began screaming verses, some of them I hadn't heard before. This made John go even more mad. He began yelling profanities at her, banging his fists against his head. This scared me. John was only 2. He didn't even know how to say pizza, for God's sake. She kept repeating and repeating verses until John fell to the ground. I looked at her and begged to know what happened. She then saw the book. She demanded to know where I found it, and I told her that I got it from my mom's backpack, that I wanted to make a recipe from it. Her face went white. She told me to keep an eye on John, and if he did anything again, to do what she had did. I asked her what was going on, and she told me this. I'm getting your mom, and she's going to help me heal John. I did what I was told. John did get back up. I felt so bad for letting him drink that horrible mixture in the first place. I cradled him for an hour, I think. Cassie and my mom came into the room then. Cassie had a mean look on her face, and my mom had a red mark on hers. Mom told me to go to the next room, that she and Cassie were going to help John. We left Cassie's house about 3 hours later. I didn't see her again. It's been 7 years since that day. I asked my mom what happened and what me and John had made. All she would tell me was that it was a potion used for conjuration, to summon a demon that can take over your worst enemy. I felt cold when she told me this. I'm sorry, John. I didn't see John or Cassie again. Honestly, I understand if they don't want to see me again. If anyone thinks that exorcisms are fake, trust me, I believe they're real. I just hope that the people who read this don't make the same mistakes I did. Basically, don't mess around with a witch's spell book. Things won't end well. Humanoid Encounter from Justice Phaser. This happened a long time ago when I was around 12 to 13 years old. I was at my great-grandmother's house when I saw it. It was during a bad rainstorm that lasted a couple of days. My great-grandmother's home was a nice open-spaced trailer. In the kitchen, there's a small door that leads outside to a nice wooden patio. The patio had stairs that led to the backyard, and about 15 meters away from it was the forest line. She lived in Maine, and the forests there are very thick. Go past 2 or 3 trees and no one would see you. During this rainstorm, the patio stairs became a waterfall. It sounded relaxing, so falling asleep was easy. That night I was fast asleep. My great-grandmother was in the master bedroom. My little brother, 11 to 12, was in the guest bedroom, and I was in the living room, sleeping awkwardly on mine and my great-grandmother's favorite recliner. I was sleeping hard until I heard a loud tapping on the patio door. Mind you that besides the wooden door, there was a secondary glass door. The tapping began to soften as I got up from the recliner. I thought it was my brother pulling a prank on me. I went on all fours to sneak and crawl to the door. The closer I got, though, the more uneasy I felt. You know that feeling you get when you're about to pull a stupid prank, but you get the notion that it's going to end badly? That's how I felt, but a bit more intense. As I was about to hit the door to scare the crap out of my brother, I heard my brother ask what I was doing. I turned my head to see my little brother in his trunks looking at me as if I was on something. I murmured, "I thought you were outside." He argued, saying he was in the guest bedroom. He thought that I was tapping, trying to get him mad. As he said that, the tapping began again, but that turned into scratching and moaning. My brother crawled under the table that was a meter away from the door. He told me that we should wake up Grammy. But me being the protective or stubborn big sister, I crawled to the door and opened it a little bit. Probably just an inch. I regretted that, and I still do. As I looked out the door, a crack of lightning lit up the patio, and I saw it. It looked like a man, but wrong. It was completely hairless and emaciated. It had teeth that looked like a bear's, but I'm not even sure it had eyes. I screamed at the top of my lungs, and so did my brother. He kept asking why the naked man was running into the woods. I think that and my scream were the reasons my great-grandmother ran out of her room with a knife. After calming my brother and I down, she had me explain myself. I told her what I saw, and she automatically ran to the window. She went from mad to frightened, and the next thing we all knew, we locked down the house, locking ourselves in the guest room. I haven't seen the said creature since that day. My great-grandmother passed away 5 years afterwards. I haven't been back to her property ever since, but I do plan to look for the creature. I need closure. I've looked for answers via the internet. The closest things I've found are either the rake or a Wendigo. If you've got an answer, I'd love to hear it. Thanks for hearing me out. Well, that brings us to the end of today's episode. I hope you enjoyed it. If you have a scary experience of your own, share it with us at darkstories.org or reddit.com/r/darknessprevails. If you have an idea for a future episode, leave it in the comments. I'd love to hear it. Until next time, here are the credits to my patrons who have donated or continue to donate. Remember, stay safe out there and stay creepy. because this world is a strange one.